Oh, God, I love that part. Why does that make me laugh? That big old man just fell down them stairs. Let's talk about Halloween. When it comes to slasher movies, the Halloween series is one of my favorite franchises. It's one of those fan bases that if you're not a fan of it, it's going to be really hard to understand. And you're probably thinking, well, what's so complicated about a guy named Michael Myers stabbing people? Well, there's a lot of different timelines. The series has went one direction, then flopped to the next. So, in a way, it's kind of like if you weren't a fan of Star Wars, you didn't understand that the movies that came out in the 90s and early 2000s were 1, 2, or 3, but yet there was 3 that existed before. It's something I would kind of relate to, in a way. But every year around this season, I tend to binge watch the series. Pretty much most of it, sometimes all of it. And there's a lot of questions that ring up when I'm going through the series that are never explained, or I kind of wonder why the director went that direction in the final cut, and it's never been touched on. And I'm going to try to wean out some of the common ones, like why isn't Michael Myers in 3? Well, it's because the series wanted to be an anthology. Why in Halloween 4 that Michael Myers is blonde for a brief moment? Well, the director said at that point in time they were rushed, and that was all they had for a mask, and he regrets the final cut. So a lot of those kind of questions have in some way already been touched on or answered through commentary or some kind of interview, so I'm going to try to wean those ones out. But if some of these have been answered that you see throughout this video, please let me know in the comment section down below and what may have been the answer to these questions. Or if there's some that are also unanswered that I haven't touched on, please let me know too, because I'd be interested to know any more things that I never thought of throughout the series. And before I begin, let me give you a heads up when I go through these questions, is that it's going to give you a different mindset of Haddonfield, because Haddonfield's just littered with garbage dads. I don't know what is up with this. I don't know if this is like a rule that John Carpenter made, that if you're going to make a sequel that there's going to be a bunch of ghost dads, or if it's just coincidental. Like, I don't know why there's just so many ghost dads in the series. So this is going to open your mind and change your view throughout this whole series. So we're going to start off with this first one, and the first movie is just a independent filmmaker classic. It's one of those movies that if I watch it enough, I'll pick up things that I'd never noticed before. Just a few weeks ago, I discovered at the ending of the movie, when it's showing all the footage of where Michael has been throughout the whole town, that in this part outside this house, that if you look close enough, and I think I've only been able to tell because it was a cleaner HD Blu-ray version, was that if you look to the side, there's a little white piece of something right there. And a part of me was like, what the hell is that? And then I thought about it, and I think it's just recycled footage of when Michael is carrying Annie inside the house when Tommy sees it. So this whole time I'm thinking the shot was used as like filmed in sequence, and then I'm like, wow, when they edited this, they just recycled that footage. And I'm just thinking, I never knew that. It just changed my mind, the whole ending of that movie. But there's a thing about this movie where it tries to be realistic, but then in a way it's also kind of got a little supernatural-esque to it, that I don't know if John Carpenter and Deborah Hill ever like touch on it. What happens when Michael's in the sheets and then Laurie's looking down at him, and the next shot, he's gone. But Laurie's looking at him the whole time. Did Laurie see something we didn't? Did he just walk away and she watched him walk away? Or was he never there in the first place? No, that's the part of the supernatural part of the movie I feel it kicks in, where it's just like, they never explain if he was ever there, if she was going crazy and seeing it, or if like he just walked away. We didn't see him walk away. Like, I don't know if John Carpenter ever addressed that, and it adds that creepy tone that I feel like doesn't get added in the later series. One of the biggest questions is, what drives Michael to kill? And this is one of the best questions because it doesn't need to be answered, and it's actually creepier if it doesn't. And that's what the filmmakers of Halloween 2018 picked up on was that they circle around that question: what does drive Michael to kill, and why does he kill? What makes him kill that person but not this person? Kind of a thing. One of the biggest ones is where did Michael learn how to drive? I mean, like Dr. Loomis makes a joke about it in the first one and saying he did pretty well last night, but the boy has been in there since he was 6, and how? I mean, I can't imagine it'd be that hard because the car was already running when he hopped into it. But to be able to quickly shift it into drive and just go is like pretty crazy. I'm surprised he didn't crash anything the whole time he was driving around Haddonfield. Also, this is kind of ties into the killing aspect and what drives him to follow Laurie. Now, if you remember, this movie came out before the second one, obviously. And it wasn't until the second one that Laurie was related to Michael. Now, if Michael is not related to Laurie in this one, and she's just a complete stranger, which, like, what drives him to kill makes it creepier, it's what drove him to follow her. I like to think, like, she came up the steps and he's going, man, I just got at this house and this lady's already coming into my house. And I like to think that's what he thinks. Because he does take a while and follows her throughout the day and then decides to kill her as the last person. And another one, I thought about this not that long ago when I was watching this. Why did John Carpenter, not saying it was a bad thing or anything, why does he make you see Michael's face at the end? Like, obviously that was scripted in some way, where Laurie pulls his mask off and you see an adult Michael for a minute. Now, I wonder if there was any reasoning behind that or not. Because obviously you can see the part of his eye jabbed when she stabbed it. And it's kind of weird. It's kind of the only moment in the whole series where they kind of make you see his face with the mask off. I mean, like, you get hits of glimpses of it in, like, 5 and 2018. But it's kind of weird. Alright, next up with the sequel. Now, this first question kind of also ties into the first one. But how does Michael survive 6 shots? So I think this plays into that supernatural element, which it kind of doesn't fit right when they actually kill him off at the end of this movie. So it's like, what difference did fire do with 6 shots? But it's kind of a weird one. And obviously, I think the real answer, and this applies to the fourth one, is that money. Money saved Michael from 6 shots. And then this also gets addressed with, obviously, John Carpenter threw in the idea that Michael and Laurie related. But why didn't Laurie's parents tell her she was adopted? Especially at this age. I think she can kind of handle it by now. And also, where are Michael's parents now that you think about it? Like, where was his parents in the first one? Is there any reason why Michael didn't see them? Did they pass away when he was in Smith's Grove? And if this is the case, they haven't confronted anything. Like, if they were alive and they hear that Michael Myers escaped the Smith's Grove, that maybe they would do something about it. So, in a way, I like to think they just moved away and just stopped caring about Haddonfield. And if you want to get weird about a theory, maybe they did live in Haddonfield and they have, like, amnesia or some shit because that old couple, I think it's the McLaughlins or whatever, that Michael steals a knife from, maybe those are Michael's parents and he never even knew. But then one last final question. I thought about this a couple years ago, and this has kind of disturbed me. You remember when Michael walks through the hospital? That's, mind you, giant and super quiet. Nobody else for this little town, I'm assuming. Michael walks through and there's a nursery and there's a bunch of babies. How close was that nursery room to where that explosion happened? It's kind of disturbing. Like, I would like to think they were far away from that explosion because, dear God. Alright, next up in the franchise is Halloween 3, and nope, no questions. This movie's a masterpiece. Just saying. Okay, I'm going to at least give one question, and that's, did Tom Atkins really save the town and stop the commercials from happening? Well, the movie leaves it ambiguous, and it's not meant to be answered, but according to the novelization, he doesn't. And like, a lot of kids end up dying, and I think the book ends on a dark note, but I think when they made the movie, they wanted it to be ambiguous, similar to, like, I think The Thing. And if you think about it, another aspect, I think he only called a local TV station. I think it'd be pretty crazy if he just all of a sudden had the number for like NBC or like something national like that. But if you're interested, along with that question, that was somewhat answered. I do have a theory for this movie and how left field it feels like in the rest of the series. As much as I love this movie, I like to think, because after this movie, in 4, 5, and 6 was a trilogy of, I think what some people call the Thorn trilogy, because apparently Michael is now in this cult in this series, that I like to think that the organization in the third one was the Silver Shamrock Company, has some kind of tie-in with that cult, the Thorn cult in 4, 5, and 6. So if you remember the third one, that they make robots. So my theory, and this is elaborate, it's a theory, is that Michael really does die in 2, and, you know, their whole conspiracy thing with 4, 5, and 6, that they bring Michael back to life and turn him into a robot, and that's why he's kind of feels unstoppable in 4, 5, and 6, and that the first 2 he feels kind of more human, I think. And that kind of helps make it kind of consistent with the timeline. It's a smooth transition that 3 easily was like a cult, and then 4 kind of hinted at that, and then that it kind of like smooths over. So it's a dumb theory, but it gives an excuse. I know why 3 doesn't have Michael in it, but it gives an excuse to kind of blend in with the rest of the series. Alright, so now we move on to Halloween 4. And Halloween 4 is what I like to believe is the start of the absent dads. So we have our character Jamie, and it's clear that she is Laurie's daughter. But what happened to Laurie? I think they obviously make it clear that she died or something, but I don't think anybody verbally says what happened to her. Now, I haven't read the novelization, so maybe that kind of clears it up. But, okay, so we get it that Laurie's her mom, but who's the dad? I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. Every time I ask this question, it doesn't really tie into the plot, but it's just weird when it's not answered, and how many times it isn't answered. So another thing is, how did Loomis survive the fire? I mean, that wasn't just a fire, that was a freaking explosion. And it's like he came out with a little slab on his face, but Michael had the turn on the whole face thing, and it's like money. That's my only answer, is money. Literally, into the real world, money saved Dr. Loomis. And my final question is, what the hell happened to this priest? Like, you don't just get to become the coolest character in the whole series and then just decide to only show it for 2 seconds of screen time. Oh my god, the series really is like Star Wars. Moving on to the 5th one. What the hell is this pirate dude? Like, who is this dude? And obviously some time has passed since the 4th one. So he just has Michael there just chilling. Like, the dude's clearly got, like, satanic shit on his wrist, and he probably didn't make the connection that there's a mass killer going around killing people in Haddonfield. Well, I don't know, he probably doesn't have a TV. It's so freaking weird. It's weird, man. Also, how did his hair grow from the mask? Did it just get a little crazier, or it kind of had, like, an 80s mullet going on, and I'm like, I don't remember it being that long in the 4th one, unless he got a new mask, but it's clearly the same one as when he's hanging out with the pirate dude. So apparently that dude must have gave him a new mask, I'm assuming, or changed it up a bit. Maybe he's got a thing about masks. Maybe he's kind of like the clown from Resurrection. Also, the psychic thing with Jamie and Michael, I don't mind it. I really don't. I kind of like it, but a part of me goes, so we're just going to ignore that Jamie killed her parents. If she's somewhat a bloodline of Michael, why didn't Laurie kill when she was that age? Or why didn't Laurie have a psychic thing at that age? But it's just weird that, like, by the 5th one, I think it might have been a different director and writer between 4, 5, and 6. But it's just weird that the 4th one had nothing to do about, you know, psychic stuff. And then all of a sudden, in this one, it's like, oh yeah, she can see everything Michael sees. And it's like, what? Maybe that's why she has dreams of Michael? Because it's kind of weird that she has dreams about him, but she doesn't know what he looks like in the 4th one. Like, she had the nightmare. So how does she know what he looked like? And I know probably they didn't think of that in the 4th one, but it's kind of like, if you see, it's kind of continuous into the 5th one. It kind of gives a reason. Now, this is one that's like, director-wise, you're not telling me that's the Myers house. Like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that's the Myers house. What like, was the original Myers house such a complicated architecture that they couldn't find a duplicate? Like, why did they decide to do this 3-story castle, haunted castle looking house? Like, was that the thing they were going for? They were going for a gothic theme? I mean, okay, the only people that are going to care are, like, diehard fans, I guess. But, like, I feel like they had to verbally say, hey, that's the Myers house. And anybody that has seen the first one goes, it is. So, why they decided to do that, I have no clue. I had no clue. 6, also known as The Curse of Michael Myers. Some people had a problem because that movie actually gave answers. But then, in a way, raised a lot of questions. So they gave Michael a reason to kill. Something about a cult and killing his immediate bloodline. But when did Michael become of this cult? So obviously, Jamie has a baby and they do this whole cultist ritual. Does that mean that happened to Michael when he was a kid? Like, when did this start? Like, was his parents in the beginning, from the very first movie, were they cultists in the 60s? Like, was this like a sequel to Rosemary's Baby or some shit? Also, again, Jamie's pregnant. I'm going to ask the question. Who's the dad? Who is the dad? Now, I think it's the director's cut, not the theatrical version. It's actually said that Michael is. But aside from that, there's a reason why it's cut, the theatrical version. Again, it's aside from the plot. But if you think about it, he's like a step nephew or a nephew-in-law to Michael. But then again, that's himself. So he's part of his own bloodline. I don't know, man. And again, the Myers house, why? This doesn't even look anything like the 5th one if they wanted to keep the continuity of what the 5th one house, like Myers house, looked like. And it's like, this one isn't too bad, but it's clearly not it. So there's no, if the plot wasn't telling me, if there was no dialogue telling me that's a Myers house, I would never think of it. So Paul Rudd plays as Tommy Doyle, and I really love that they show him grown up. But if that's Tommy, what happened to Lindsay? Like, I know that's not really a big part of the plot. Like, this is another thing where I wonder if they explain it in the novelization. But Tommy never mentions anything. Like, he talks about how maybe he encountered Michael before, but he never says anything about, like, him experiencing it with a little girl named Lindsay. And where she went or anything. So I'm really curious on, maybe what happened to her. So moving on to the series, this whole timeline gets erased. And we starts new with H2O. And this is just going from Halloween 1 to Halloween 2 to H2O. That's this timeline. So we start off the movie with a nurse from the first movie. Well, the first 2 movies, I should say. My question is, Michael has only met her once. For a brief moment. In 1978, 20 years ago from this movie. How the hell did he learn where she lives? Like, he only saw her briefly, trying to get her out of that damn car. Like, how did he find her? Here we go again with the dads. Lori mentions to John about how much of, like, an ass that his dad is, but again, who's his dad? And I'm assuming it's the same dad maybe from the timeline of 4. Where are all these absent dads? And then this one, it's so weird. I don't know if this is a trope. Because I know that Jamie Lee Curtis's mom is in this movie, Janet Leigh. Who's obviously from Psycho. That's one of her biggest films that she was in. And she does a little hint of the cameo of the car from Psycho is in the background. But this one I don't understand. What is that car that mom drives in the beginning of this movie? What is that car? Like, did she found it in, like, the battlefields of World War II and then decided to drive it? And then does she have insurance on it? Like, what is that car? Like, she, like, broke down and had to borrow a car from the Munsters house or, like, something. That's, like, why is that his car? Like, why is that her car? It's just her and her daughter. Like, I can imagine her driving her daughter to school and dropping her off and then killing like 5 kids with the exhaust coming out of that thing. And a serious question, how did Ronnie survive? Like, he got shot and he literally just laid there and died, and then he comes back to save Lori, and it's like, holy shit, LL Cool J is the first black man to survive a horror movie, let alone a fucking Michael Myers movie. And then when he does get almost killed in a Michael Myers movie, he gets shot instead of stabbed. Like, and then not even by Michael Myers. Like, that's kind of messed up. And I guess, like, because he's a rapper, he's able to survive from getting shot. So that's my only answer to that question. All right, moving on to Resurrection. This movie, my biggest question, why? Like, just why? Like, honestly, if the series ended at H2O, I'm happy with that. Like, honestly, the later series I don't mind, but this movie just shat on that ending of that movie. I mean, it gave it an excuse to give Michael to keep living by saying that it was one of the coroners or one of the officers or something like that. And he crushed his throat and he couldn't be able to speak. So it kind of just, knowing that it exists kind of ruins the ending of H2O for me. And I wish I could have went on watching that movie without knowing that. And that movie, I mean, like, even the worst Halloween movies I still enjoy, I guess, but it really just put a bad ending to H2O, and I really hate that. Now we're going to go on with Rob Zombie's remake. A lot of the questions I had with the director's choosing of, like, the first movie, a lot of people asked that about the remake and then the sequel. Well, I'm really not going to ask those kind of ones, like, why did he decide to do this and that? It's kind of because, like, he kind of explains himself in the commentary. I mean, it seems confusing, but it's just his take on what it did. So I'm not going to ask as much as those questions. But my first question for this remake is actually directed towards you. Did you know the girl that's playing Judith Myers is actually the younger girl that plays Jenny from Forrest Gump? And then that is the kid from Spy Kids? Michael Myers killed Spy Kids. Okay, I'm sure they did, but did anybody find that kid that Michael killed? Like, did anybody find his body? Like, I'm sure they did, but when it goes over the news story about the Myers being killed, they never mention that kid, so I'd like to think that they found him a couple days later, but they just kind of never addressed it. I'm not saying that it needed to be, but it's kind of just something that it was never, like, mentioned at all, that, like, they found his body. And when Michael goes back to the house, I always wondered, how did that mask get there? Like, I'm trying to imagine, I'm not saying that it's, like, a flaw or anything, I'm just saying that, like, I'm trying to imagine Michael, after killing everybody, taking the mask off and prying open a floorboard and then, like, putting the mask on there and hiding it, knowing he was going to get taken away or something. And the fact that, like, it stayed there the whole time and he just had no problem putting that on, even though there was, like, cobwebs and spiders and shit all over it. I know that Rob Zombie wanted to make Michael more intimidating, which I actually don't mind. But in a realistic standpoint, inside the continuity of the movie, how did Michael get so freaking big? Okay, I get, like, his growth spurt could have happened for the height. But how do you get all those muscles? Like, I can't imagine they allowed him to lift weights inside the sanitarium. And if they did, I don't really see any, so it's kind of like, holy shit, dude. And before I get to the next one, you thought I was going to get out of this question, didn't you? Where's Michael's dad? Huh? It's about every single movie there's an absent dad. Where is Michael's dad in this movie? Well, and Judith, I should say. Because according to me, it doesn't look like Ronnie is their dad. Because otherwise, that'd be some weird Rob Zombie incest.
Man, that bitch got herself a nice little dumper.
Dr. Loomis talks to their mom, and he says, Miss Myers. Now, Mrs. So, no mention of murder, no mention of just leaving. What is going on with these Haddonfield fathers? At least when there was the baby and curse, Paul Rudd stood up and, like, was like, I'm going to be the dad now. Like, props to him. And honestly, there's no good fatherly role models in Haddonfield. And when there is a father present, he just stands there like, duh, or says shit like this.
I got peanut butter on my penis.
And speaking of age 40, I call it age 40 because it technically is Halloween 40 years later. And I feel like it's pretty similar to H2O, but a different timeline. It's a pretty well thought out script. I'll give it that. I could tell like Danny McBride when he was writing it or like helping writing it, like took a lot of thought process and the direction they wanted to go with the movie. But this question I feel like will get answered in the next entry. Halloween Kills, I believe, is supposed to come out in 2021. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. This is another dad thing. Who is the damn grandpa? Laurie obviously had a daughter. Her daughter grew up and got married and then had their kid, who is now the grandkid in this movie. But who is the grandpa? I like to think it was Ben Tramer because this takes place directly after the first one. It skips the second one. So I like to believe Ben Tramer is still alive. Like I said, that's a theory. It's probably already answered with the script of this new entry, but I'm really hoping that's who it is. But it's just so weird. It's the fact that like, what were the 5 movies now with absent dads, and it's just like, what the hell happened? Haddonfield's notorious for 2 things: serial killers first and ghost dads second. And like I said, it's not like it's like the same timeline. It's multiple different timelines. It's consistent. It's pretty consistent. I think absent dads are more consistent in this series than the Myers house has ever been. This might be more of a complaint, but this is a thing that I wonder with the writing process of this is why doesn't Michael stalk as much? I mean, even with the Rob Zombie remakes, he has his moments of stalk, and that's what I feel like Michael Myers really is. I feel like he's a stalker in a curious spirit roaming around first, and then a killer second. Because like there are a couple moments in the first remake I actually enjoy of like him just standing there being kind of creepy. But in as much as I love this sequel of Halloween 2018, he does like no stalking at all. Like he just kills. There's only like 2 moments I can think where Michael is being really creepy in this movie without killing. And that's one when he's inside the closet in the boys' room, just kind of lurking around. But even after that, he still attacks. And then the second time, which happens before this, is when the podcasters are at the graveyard and he's just watching from a distance. Which I never realized till recently, that's kind of like what he did to Laurie when she shows up at the house. Is that he's kind of sitting there and I feel like he's wondering, man, why do these people out of nowhere decide to come see me, and like just kind of watches them and then, follows them. But it doesn't take him long to obviously murder them. Here's a big question that I feel like some people kind of went over, but not really answered. Is that who crashed the bus? Now, a lot of people think Laurie did it. And I think that's actually what Danny McBride was intending. I think I don't remember where I heard this. I think he really was intending Laurie to be the one that crashed the bus, because it does make sense. She is the one that's ready for Michael and she wants to kill him, and she even says it to the sheriff, is that like, I was hoping he would break out just so I can kill him. But I think there was something where he felt was very uncomfortable about her helping the family and then being the kind of cause of all this chaos. Like, in a way, she was kind of responsible for all these murders. Kind of similar to Dr. Loomis, but Dr. Loomis really didn't want Michael to get out. But like, if Laurie wanted him to get out, it would almost seem it'd be a different tone with Laurie. It just wouldn't fit right, knowing that she's kind of responsible for all these murders. A similar question is, what was the purpose of the doctor? Dr. Santrini or whatever? Like what was the purpose of his character? Like, I think he was like a last minute idea, because after realizing it'd be weird if Laurie was the one that crashed the bus, that it would be him to kind of be the thriving force to get Michael to escape and get him closer to Laurie. The whole reasoning at the end, where like it threw me for a loop when I first watched it, when he kills the sheriff and then he drives Laurie over to see Michael. It gave, if you think about it, Michael is not looking for Laurie at all but it's the doctor that's the thriving force to bring him to her. And then so he literally drives Michael over there. And I think so, like, that might explain more into the beginning of the movie when the bus crashes, because the doctor insists that he gets on the bus with Michael. So I like to think that he did something to crash that bus to let Michael escape, and he somehow miraculously survived. I mean, after all, this guy has worked his whole life with Michael and hasn't got a single peep out of him. I'm pretty sure this guy's going to be willing to do whatever it takes to get something out of this guy. Or thing, I should say. Okay, one last one for this movie. This is going to sound kind of dark-sided. I'm not saying I wanted this to happen. But why didn't Michael kill the baby that he walked past? Like I said, I'm not saying I wanted this to happen. But if they weren't going to do that, why would they script the longest shot of the whole movie that had to be the most well-timed and effort put into? That they would include a baby crying in a crib and Michael to walk past it and just look at it and walk away. Now, I think it's meant to raise a question. I think it's meant to get your gears turning to talk about it. Because part of it follows into the what drives Michael to kill. Because just earlier in this movie, not that long ago, he just killed a kid that was in the truck. And I thought that was like, holy crap. But then, so when you get to that moment, I don't think it was just a scare. Because at that moment, you're like, holy crap, he just killed a kid. Like, what's stopping him now? So I think part of that just makes you wonder a little bit more, what goes on in that little head of his? And, like, you know, what moves around? What motivates him? Now, I know that I somewhat addressed it, but I kind of skipped Halloween 2, the sequel to the remake of Rob Zombie's, but I went through it. I watched the commentary. I don't think I have any questions. I think the movie is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not... I mean, there's a lot of questions about the white horse and everything, but like I said, if you listen to the commentary, Rob Zombie does explain himself. That's all I got. It's a rush movie. I mean, even he admits it, and he lost all motivation for that film, so maybe I'll just give it as much effort as I will to that as he did. Okay, I realized when I was making this list, I might sound kind of whiny and complaining about this series, but honestly, if I wasn't a fan of it, I wouldn't be watching it as many times as I do. And if I didn't watch it 100 times, I wouldn't even be noticing some of these flaws and errors that are in it that don't get addressed. So, I mean, like I said, I'll even watch even the crappiest one. I just love this series. So with that, I will say to you, Happy Halloween.